species are quite distinct here as well too, compared to the other sites as well. Okay, so moving on to my next field site, which was Mount Lewis. This was the tropical rainforest site, and when we arrived at the site, we soon realised that the bottom elevation sites weren't actually very good for surveying epiphytes. Here the forest had been logged previously, and they'd also had a lot of cyclones, which is the Australian version of like a typhoon, come through and destroy a lot of the forests at the lower elevation. So therefore I ended up changing my design a little bit, and I had elevation sites every 100 metres instead of every 200 metres. So I also too got to measure here light and humidity as well. I was lucky to get a bit more research money, so I could get some humidity data loggers, and I was able to place them at each site in the canopy and at the lower trees. I was also able to measure light too from using hemispherical photography, where we take a photo of the sky and then we can put those photos through a computer program, and then it will tell you exactly how much light will reach that one spot in the forest. So here I wanted to test if Australian epiphytes fit into the Johansen zones, which is the commonly used survey method, which is been around for 40 years and is used quite widely over the world. So for each epiphyte that I found in the survey, I took a light measurement, I measured the height from the ground, and I also measured the branch size and the substrate depth as well. So substrate depth is the canopy soil, or the humus layer that grows within the roots. Often when we find branches, you get epiphytes that have a whole bunch of soil that grows underneath them, and this often more drought sensitive epiphytes will grow on these areas where there's thick canopy soil. So here I found 52 species of vascular epiphytes, but I only used 24 species in this study because I needed to have replication of each species. So I needed to find at least 10 individuals for each species in order to use it in this analysis. So in order to, I wanted to look at how the different epiphyte communities were related to each other and how they fit within the zones. So I used a Euclidean distance matrix to see how similar each species was in terms of the measured habitat features. Or I used Ward's method to perform a cluster analysis to come up with these 4 groups of species. Okay, so here are the results. Starting on the right, whoops, sorry, wrong button. The right here is group 4, and this is the group that was associated with more the lower height zone. So you can see quite a number of species were grown in the base zone and the lower trunk as well too. Group 3 was the opposite group. It tended to be more species growing in the inner canopy and the mid canopy. And then we had group 1 and group 2 that pretty much had identical distributions over the different Johansen zones. As you can see in the middle here, majority of these species were growing in the inner canopy. So what we can see here is that a lot of these groups had characteristics that light and substrate thickness, it was kind of characteristic to where they grew. So group 4, which grew on the base of the zones that were more on the base of the tree, they tended to have lower light levels and lower substrate thickness. On the opposite side of that, the group 3, which was more the more exposed habitats, had a higher level of light. But these two group species 1 and 2, which are quite similar in terms of their distribution, actually had quite different characteristics in measured characteristics. So light was a lot higher in group 1, and also substrate thickness was a lot lower. So this tends to suggest that with group 1 tends to be epiphytes that are more associated with dry conditions, because they do have this higher light reading, and also too they have this lower substrate thickness. And remember that substrate, if you've got a thicker substrate, you have more access to water as well too. So this was quite an interesting result, is because we have two distinct epiphyte communities that are pretty much growing in the same zone. So that was quite an interesting result for this study. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about some research too that I did in Panama. So I was lucky enough to spend a month in Panama working with some German scientists. And we went to the Smithsonian Institute, and we were able to study epiphytes in the cloud forests in Panama in a place called Fortuna, which is a really beautiful spot. So here I wanted to ideally replicate what I was doing in Australia, but I only had 1 month to do field work, and the trees there were quite a different structure to what we had in Australia, and they were quite smaller trees. And so I decided to do a completely different study. And one of the studies that interested me the most was looking at how different host trees influence epiphyte diversity. So this is a topic that's been studied quite a lot in the past. And one of the arguments about the differences between different host trees comes down to people would argue that the difference is in light, because here we have 3 different host trees. So we've got a normal rainforest tree, or a dicot, then we had a palm tree, and then a tree fern. And as you can imagine, the leaves of palm trees and tree ferns and normal rainforest species can be quite different, which allows for different levels of light to reach the trunk where I was surveying the epiphytes. So what I did before I even started surveying is I actually used the measurements for light to look at the different light patterns on the trunks of each of these species. And what I found is there actually wasn't much difference between the 3 species, so they're pretty much the same. And so then I went to survey the epiphytes as well too, and what I found was that the tree ferns had quite a significant higher number of vascular epiphyte species. So they were one of the only hosts that had filmy ferns on it. They were also hosts to a lot of other fern species, as well as a lot of orchid species and bromeliads as well too. So that was quite an interesting finding. And this is generally because a tree fern is actually, its trunk is actually made up of very spongy material, so it can store a lot more water. And also too, it's quite rough as well too, so the seeds of vascular epiphytes can easily colonise onto these tree ferns. Another interesting example is that we had a high level of liverwort cover on some of the rainforest trees. And I think this is because the rainforest trees have quite a hard bark, and they're quite smooth as well too. So they may have been one of the only types of epiphytes that could easily colonise this habitat. Great, thank you very much. That's the end of this first talk. Here's a really daggy photo of me climbing with a very crooked helmet on as well too.
Project.
thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. So now I'm going to talk about the tree projects, and I find that this is a little bit more exciting than my research, so I'm sorry if I put you to sleep before talking about epiphytes, but this is something that I'm really passionate about, and my husband, Steve, as well, very passionate about as well. And so this next presentation will just be talking about how we started this project and how we got into photographing trees in this way. And plus I'll have some great pictures to show you along the way as well too. So I've just talked to you a bit about my experiences in epiphyte research. So in order to study epiphytes, I had to learn how to climb trees. I needed a field assistant too, so my husband Steve also learned how to climb as well too. And during the 3 years of my research, we actually spent a lot of time climbing into the canopies of trees. We spent about 6 months or 7 months in total doing field work, with every day climbing up into the canopy of these beautiful rainforest trees. And what the consequence of that is that we absolutely fell in love with the canopy of trees and rainforests, and we just had a really good appreciation of how different a rainforest canopy can be to the forest floor. So when we tend to visit forests, we often walk along a path in the forest floor, and that's about our only experience of the forest. So on the forest floor, it can be very dark and shady and cool, and often quite beautiful, but the canopy of a forest is actually quite different. When you climb up into the top of a tree in a canopy, it's a completely different environment. There's a lot more light, it's often warmer, and it tends to be a lot more vibrant. And if you can climb right up into the top of the tree, it tends to be a lot more like being out in an open field than it is like being in a forest. Also too, in the canopy, we find a lot more different plant and animal species living up there than we do on the forest floor. So when we started climbing, we soon realised that this experience of being in the canopy is one that most people don't get to experience. And we thought that was very much a shame, because we do love it we do love the canopy so much, and it's such a different place. So Steve and I were always very interested in how we could go about sharing this experience with other people. Steve has a very long history as a professional photographer, working with over about 10 years in photography. And so Steve definitely had that skill set of being able to capture beautiful images of these environments. So how the project got started came about because when I was doing my research, as I mentioned before, there was really not many epiphyte researchers in Australia. In fact, I was the only one. And so I ended up joining a group of people in New Zealand called the New Zealand Epiphyte Network. There's a lot more epiphyte researchers in New Zealand because they tend to have quite a high diversity of epiphytes. As you can see from this picture here, this is one of the forests on the North Island of New Zealand. And as you can see, there's quite a high level of epiphytes in these forests. So the woman who ran the New Zealand Epiphytes was a wonderful person named Catherine Kirby. And she also worked as an environmental educator, and she was very passionate about how we could share the forests and the canopy of trees with the rest of the world. We were talking one day about how we could go about creating some engaging content on New Zealand's forests. We started talking about these wonderful pictures, which are the famous National Geographic redwood portraits. Now, these are quite well-known photos, And they were one of the first to use this style of photography where you actually take a photo of the tree from the very top to the bottom, and then you stitch all these different photos together to get a level view of the tree. What we really appreciate about these photos is that it shows the whole entire tree, including the canopy of the tree, which is quite different and one that we often don't get to see from the ground. As you can appreciate, when you walk in a forest and you come to a very big tree, you can stand at the base of the tree and see how big it is at the base. But when you look up, you know that it's a big tree, but you can't really picture it in your mind. It's kind of similar to when you're at the top of a very tall building and you look down at the ground. It's very hard to get that sense of distance of how high you actually are above the ground. So this is what's so wonderful about these photos, is that it shows the whole tree in its entirety. And also too, it has, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but there's some little people standing here as a scale reference. And so you actually really get to see how big these trees are. So we decided to replicate this style of photography on another tree, and a tree in New Zealand was our first one that we did. And so our goals with the project wasn't just to take a picture of the tree, but also have a whole collection of photos and videos and a whole bunch of different media, like 3D video and time lapse, that just helps to showcase the forest in a different way. So the way that we did this and the way that we took this photo is that we needed to set up a camera rigging system that would run the vertical length of the tree. So the way that we did this was to install a camera system like this one using climbing techniques. The reason why we used a camera like this and we didn't use drones is that when we started back in 2015, drone technology was still, it wasn't where it was today, I guess. And so in order to have a drone that could carry a professional camera like this one, you would need quite a heavy drone, and you'd also need a qualified pilot to actually fly the drone as well too. Drone pilots, their fee is about $1,000 US a day, and we just did not have that budget to be able to do that. So it was a lot cheaper and economical for us to build our own system like this and take the time to install it in the tree. So here is a very bad artistic representation of what we did. As you can see here, this is the tree that we took the photo of. And then we also needed another tree of the same height, which we called the rigging tree. And we would get climbers to climb each of these trees and then shoot a line across. And from that line, we would then pull a rope across, and from that rope, we would attach the camera platform. So this camera platform would move up and down, and it would take photos of the tree at different intervals. So the way we did this would be to pull the camera all the way to the top, then we'd lower it a meter, take a photo. This was done using a remote trigger. And then once that photo was taken, it'd be dropped a meter, and then another photo would be taken, and then so forth, until we had all the way down the tree. And then afterwards, Steve would stitch these photos together to make a composite image. So I have a short video that explains this. Let's see if it'll play, hopefully. There's meant to be a little bit of sound, but I think it's just music and sound effects, so it's not a big deal. So here you can actually see Steve raising up the camera. And this is taken from our project in Tasmania, which is the second project that we did. So here you can see this is how the photos were taken and then stitched together later on. Okay, so the first project that we did was in New Zealand. In March 2015, a team of us spent over a month living in the forest, climbing these trees and photographing and filming the surrounding habitat. In New Zealand, on the North Island, they have some really incredible forests which are called podocarp forests, which are essentially a special type of gymnosperm tree that grows in the forest there. We were lucky enough to have an amazing team of climbers helping us out for this project. This included wonderful people like Andrew Harrison, who's pictured here, who had competed in the World Tree Climbing Competition. Also too, we had some really other excellent climbers like James Kilpatrick, who has actually won the World Tree Climbing Championships 3 times in a row. So we were really lucky to have such a great team with us, and we were able to install our camera systems fairly easily. We also did some other really ambitious installations as well too. Here you can see a cable cam that we actually installed between the canopy of 2 emergent trees. This actually took 3 days to install, and it's a 50-metre cable cam that's actually 35 metres off the ground. So from this we were able to put the camera on it along with a slider, and we were able to take some really interesting time-lapse photography moving between the canopy of these 2 trees. So here is the first tree portrait that we completed, and this is of a beautiful rimu tree, which is one of the more common species in the forests. We chose this species of tree because it actually occurs is that we spent 1 month in this forest looking at this tree every single day, and we actually had no idea that this tree looked like this. The way it looked like on the ground was that it was leaning off to the side a little bit, and it actually looked like the canopy of the tree was quite small. But as you can see from this picture, it's quite the opposite. This tree has a beautiful big canopy, and yeah, it was just remarkable really how different it was. So we've had a lot of luck in New Zealand. Our exhibition has managed to travel around to many museums across the country in both the North Island and the South Island. And we've also had exhibitions at a lot of art galleries as well. This has been really great for providing educational content to people, and because this exhibition has travelled around to a lot of cities, it means that people living in the city that don't actually get a chance to come out and visit these forests have been able to experience what these forests are like. We also had our work featured in New Zealand Geographic. They did a wonderful story that covered canopy research, looking at epiphyte researchers in New Zealand, as well as people studying insects and all other different species that live in the canopy of New Zealand's trees. So our second project was the Tasmanian Tree Project. And this was a very important one for us because both Steve and I live in Tasmania, and the forests that we have down there are actually quite remarkable. These forests are actually home to the world's tallest flowering tree species. Eucalyptus regnans grows up to 100 metres tall, and as you can see from these photos, have a quite impressive shape to them. They're very different compared to what our normal impression of what a tree is. They're also very unique because while they are a rainforest tree, They also need fire for their life cycle as well. They tend to need fire frequencies that occur between 200 to 500 years. If they get fired too frequently, Eucalyptus regnans can't exist in this environment. But if there's no fires at all, they will eventually die out and the other rainforest species will take over. We also have a very interesting political history with logging and forest conservation in Tasmania. Unfortunately, we are still logging some of our forests in Tasmania. New Zealand tree project. So the trees here were twice as big as the ones we were working in New Zealand. And also too, they were quite further distance apart. And so when we were climbing the trees and rigging up the system, it actually took a lot longer than what we did in New Zealand. So it took about 2 weeks in total to actually set up the camera systems into the trees. These trees are actually quite interesting to climb, and when I say interesting, also I kind of mean really scary as well. Eucalyptus regnant trees tend to die from the top down, and so a lot of the top of these trees are actually dead, and so you have very big dead branches at the top of the trees. And when you learn how to tree climb, that's the first thing that people tell you not to do, is to climb trees with dead branches on them. So we were still able to manage to safely climb these trees, but it did add that element of danger as well. We also had a few more problems in New Zealand with the weather. So because our camera system is actually just hanging from 2 strings, we need perfectly still conditions to be able to successfully use this system. Unfortunately, Tasmania is a very, very windy place, and so we ended up being out in the field for 67 days in total, just because we needed to wait for those perfectly still days so we could use the camera system. So this is the picture that we took of Eucalyptus regnans. This tree is 84 metres tall, and it's just an incredible picture. Like I said with New Zealand, we spent quite a long time looking at this tree, but when we actually stitched the photo together, we were actually blown away how big this tree was. It's quite amazing. I know it's quite limiting having such a narrow photo on a PowerPoint presentation, so here are some sections in more detail. As you can see here, this really illustrates the difference between the light on the top of the tree and the darkness of the forest floor. So we were really lucky with this project because we were able to get into a lot of really high quality museums and art galleries around Australia. It's currently touring the capital cities in Australia at the moment. Here is some, that's meant to be, hang on. Oh, okay. I think this is a video.
These trees are the tallest flowering plant species in the world, and the tallest is 99.8 metres.
Our goal is to not only show it for the first time, but empower people to understand that what they have is of a global significance.
Yo, you call me?
W?
Hey, I'm pretty much at the top of the tree. I'm going to start building the anchor, and you'll be ready to climb soon.
Excellent, that was just a little short promo. So here we are with one of our exhibitions that we had in Tasmania over the summer. This is at the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery. we had quite a wonderful exhibition here that ran for 3 months over the summertime. We also had a lot of media for this project as well. We managed to get into a lot of international media. So the BBC News ran a story on our project, as well as Die Welt, which is a German newspaper. And we also had some guest appearances on some TV shows in Australia. As you can see here, Steve has been interviewed on the Today program, and also the National Public News as well too. So since then, we have managed to do one other smaller project. As I said before, there's still a lot of logging going on in Tasmania, and unfortunately it's not very economically viable, but the government still insists on logging these forests because there are regional parts of Tasmania where unemployment is quite high, and unfortunately the government sees logging as the only solution to this unemployment in these areas. So we've been working with a great organisation in Tasmania called the Bob Brown Foundation. They have a campaign going at the moment in one of the beautiful forests up in the northwest of the state of Tasmania. This area is called the Tarkine, and it's a huge area with an amazing diversity of habitats. It's actually home to one of the largest regions of temperate rainforest in the southern hemisphere. It also has beautiful eucalypt forests like these ones here. So we did a smaller tree project here at this site in the Frankland, where we found one of the beautiful rainforest trees and took another tree portrait of it, as you can see here. We did this one a little bit differently. You can remember me saying at the start of the talk that the reason we didn't use drones at the beginning was because the technology wasn't really there yet. This year, the Phantom 4 Pro has been released, which actually has quite a high quality camera attached to it. We were able to take this photo using this drone, and while it's still quite a good picture and it comes up quite beautifully at a low resolution, it still doesn't have that ability to be blown up into a very big picture. But here is one of the common rainforest trees in this region. This is called Notophagus cunninghamii, the myrtle beech, and they're a beautiful tree. So future projects too, we're looking over to Asia. This is one of the reasons why we're here in Taiwan, and I've done a wonderful project here in Taiwan. But our future plans too are also to look at other rainforest trees in the Southeast Asian region. Recently, there's news that have just come out recently of the tallest tropical tree that has been found in Malaysia. It's 94 metres tall, this tree, and it actually has a canopy spread of 40 metres. So that's an incredibly big tree. So we are hoping to get over to Malaysia sometime this year to do a project over there. We're also very interested in looking at going over to the US and doing some projects in Oregon and maybe Alaska as well too. So yeah, watch this space. We're going to be doing a lot of exciting projects in the future. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to hand over to Steve, and he's going to be talking about the Taiwan Tree Project and what we've been up to in the forest over the last couple of weeks.
Okay, how are we all? Good? Long talking. This presentation is going to be very visual, and I have to give you a little bit of warning first, in that with only 2 days since leaving the forest, I haven't had a lot of time to make the best material. So we're going to have lots of great photos, but for sure these are not finished products. Just give me 1 second here. Da-da-da. There we are, sorry. Okay, so before I do start, I have to say a huge thank you, first of all, to Director Huang, who without his help and releasing the marvelous and remarkable Rebecca to help us on the project, or for us to help her on the project, I should say. It was a fantastic investment in time and a great honour to be working with such esteemed scientists and people and forest lovers. So I'll just get straight into showing some of the images from Taiwan. Our project here in Taiwan was a little bit different to previous projects. Our previous projects were very small scale. In Tasmania, for those 67 days, I was out there by myself for most of those days. Jen would come and visit, as would other climbers, to take photos of, but for the most part, I was out there for such a long time just by myself. With Taiwan, we had an amazing array of people, and people who volunteered, and that is a real cornerstone of being able to perform these projects. We don't expect money, we don't expect fame and fortune. We are really doing these projects purely because they are fun. And they fit a unique opportunity for us to communicate to other people how special the rainforest trees are and the canopy. So the tree projects is a project which has a lot of really good things going for it. We have adventure of the climbing and the exploration. We have the science, so we're gathering new data and showing new things to people as we do this. And it's also fun. So it's a great selection of criteria to be embarking on. So going back to the volunteers, it is without a doubt impossible for us to do anything without the right people. And again, Rebecca managed to find the most amazing people to help us out along the way. Particularly with the beginning of the project, installing the camera systems up high into the trees, it is extremely difficult. As Jennifer was saying just before, the Tasmania project, it took 2 weeks to install the camera system. So that is 2 weeks where we are out in the bush, camping, but essentially not recording any images. Alright, so that is a huge time it was very, very stressful. But in Taiwan, amazing 2 days. Thank you very much. In Taiwan as well, we did have a very short time frame. In Tasmania, it was luxurious because we could just hang out in the bush for as long as we want. It was fine. In Taiwan, we have people, support crews, everything helping us, and so having a project 1 month, 2 months, maybe 3 months was not a really good option. We have to get there, perform, do our job, and then we have to go. Tomorrow, or would you believe? Sadly. You also might not appreciate just how much equipment is required. We've talked a lot about cameras and things like that. And yeah, sure, cameras are fun, they're expensive and all the rest of it, but the amount of climbing line used at this project, it was, let's just add it up real quickly, 200 meters, 120 meters, 70 meters, another 100 meter,
Another 250.
and another 250. So that was just some, and that's just for the camera system. So that's the distances of line that we are using throughout the project. For us, I have to say that we rather enjoy this. This is a lot of fun. This is very, very wet. The entire first day of the setup, it rained very heavily. And I mean all day. But with the right people, with the right attitude as well, everybody stuck to it. The documentary crew was out there with their cameras filming. I was out there filming with my cameras. The climbers were non-stop in the trees all day. This is a short video. Again, very quick turnaround on producing some media, but this is a very quick video which just shows how Bert, what's Bert's Chinese name? How Bert was just an amazing person to have working with us. This is his special device for getting into the tree. So this is basically a weapon. It's pressurized with air. And he shoots a weight, a little weight, up high into the tree, attached to a very thin line. Now from that very thin line, we attach a slightly bigger line. And from that slightly bigger line, we attach the actual climbing line. So it's a 3-step process. And you will talk to any tree climber in the world, and they will always tell you the most difficult part of tree climbing is getting into the tree.
Delicious. It is to have an umbrella. I was trying to say before, yeah, it's just going up the road there, it's going to climb that second tree, the biggest tree, basically do what that does, and just like smash it. Yeah. Hopefully crush it. It's going to crush it. You have to work out the time.
And this was basically what we did all day. Stand around in the rain, making plans what to do next. And this is Bert in the top of the tree. So he's right at the very, very top of the tree, and he's about to take the horizontal shot. He's about to shoot horizontal from the rigging tree to our actual subject tree. He's pressurizing the device. And I can tell you that that is not easy. It is extremely difficult. You can't imagine. Bert is maybe 50 meters from the ground. He's at the very summit, the very, very top of a tree on the thinnest of branches. He pressurizes the cylinder. He balances, uses both hands, aims and shoots. And first try, hits the target. Okay? Amazing, amazing people. Alright? Again, Tasmania, 2 weeks. Taiwan, 2 days. Good work. This is perhaps my favourite photo from the first day. It is the story of the entire day summed up in one image. Everybody is just soaking wet. We are trying to use the umbrella. You can see how much water is coming off that umbrella. And Brian has just come out of the tree where he has been for maybe 5 hours. He was in the tree working. So he's up there in the top of the tree getting saturated all day. And he's back down on the ground and everyone's trying to help him warm up very, very quickly. one of the side benefits of the Taiwan Tree Project was also the amazing culinary skills of the team. We had some amazing meals, and I had the best chicken of my life in the middle of nowhere, up high in the mountains. It was an amazing experience. And again, good team of people, all volunteers, but all extremely passionate. Okay. So the next day, the second day, the setup was all business. Everybody got straight down into work. Lots of lines being installed, starting climbing very early in the morning. An absolutely magnificent morning it was. Here one of the climbers from Bert's team was climbing up, or the Shipan National Park I should say, was climbing up, and if I could have had this moment of weather last for the entire 2 weeks, this would have been it. A perfect, subtle and gentle mist, a little bit steamy maybe, and then the sunlight just coming through. This lasted for about 5 minutes, but this was the most amazing weather conditions that I saw during the 2 weeks, and I was dreaming of having my camera system installed and just taking the tree portrait at this very moment, but we had to keep working. Also a great sense of scale. The subject trees in Taiwan, it was not just one tree, it was actually 3 trees that were growing close together, the 3 sisters, very famous group of trees. And you can actually see the middle sister, which we did pretty much all of our climbing, the small sister here, and then the big sister out the back. So it's a fantastic tight clump of really huge trees. Installing the camera system is it's not an exceptional piece of technology. Okay? Our camera system, it uses a standard camera that you can buy from the shop, but it involves creativity and problem solving. All right? So we have a branch that we just found, a lovely cypress branch that we found in the bush. We trimmed it to size, we cut it to size, and we are about to install our camera frame with these pulleys. So this is it in the sky. So these lines are going from the ground up into the sky, and up there is about $10,000 worth of cameras, and there's a 2.5 meter long beam of wood holding those cameras in place. On the afternoon of the second day, after much work, we took the camera into the sky for the very, very first time. And then we waited. Part of the idea of the project is to be patient. You can take a photo at any moment of any day with a result. However, we want the photo. We don't want a photo. We want to make the best photo possible. And to do that, we need to be patient, and we need to wait for the right conditions. And we did wait. Luckily, on the third day, Jen and I were left alone, happily, I should say, in the bush. But on that third day, we managed to have some sunshine and dry our clothes, our tent, our sleeping bags, our shoes. So the third day was quite comfortable. The weather that I most idolized or most wanted to form the photo was this steamy mist. We are in a cloud forest, all right? These clouds are part of the normal daily cycle of that place. This is the story that we want to tell with the photo. So we had magnificent days where there was a beautiful red glowing sunset. No good. Right? It visually is pretty. It looks good. However, it doesn't tell the right story. Right? the tree needs to be portrayed in its typical, the weather that has made that tree. All right, so we definitely needed these steamy days to create the right atmosphere. More steamy days. So on the fifth day, we did have a slight modification to the system, which enabled it to work a little bit better. But here you can see Rebecca, Jen, and then the documentary crew. So I'm sure you've all done projects, you've all written pieces, you've done these things where you've had to organise a lot of pieces and put them together. Again, Rebecca and her organisational skills not only organised us to be here, but she organised 2 different TV crews to come along and a whole bunch of volunteers. So this is an amazing organisational effort, all geared around telling a new story about Taiwan's forests. So this is the camera system about to go back up into the sky, and again, it's not complex. Right? Putting it in the right place is very complex, but the device itself is very simple. I will say that there it is going up into the sky. I will say that the National Geographic portraits, if we had the money, we could spend it. I will say that the National Geographic portraits had a budget of $30,000. Alright? And I'm not gonna, our budget was not that, but our passion gives us a similar result. So money is not always the thing that makes a good result. You should always remember that. It's passion and enthusiasm. So this is another short video of our camera system installed in the sky. These are just very, very preliminary shots. I've barely even looked at these myself. One of the most amazing things that I was surprised by when coming to Taiwan and going to this location was there's no sound here, was the dramatic scenery that exists in Taiwan. Unfortunately, if you were to ask 100 people in Australia what they think of Taiwan, what their impressions are of Taiwan, they will all say a big city. But we were so surprised when, like, working at the initial stages of this project back in Australia, that Taiwan has this most amazing resource of mountainous, forested scenery. It is absolutely incredible. I very much liken our first drive out into the mountains of Taiwan. I almost think it's exactly the same as the scenery in New Zealand. Very dramatic scenery, very, very pristine forests, huge rivers, and a very, very young geological landscape. Very dynamic. It's an absolutely beautiful place, and you should all be very, very proud of where you live. So that's the camera system. The documentary crew coming out, very, very cool. So this is home for the last few weeks. It was luxury. I tell you, it was magnificent. It was. We should have showed a photo of the Tasmanian camp. Yeah. Not nearly as good as this. And so this is where we lived for 2 weeks. That's our little tent there. Everyone's sitting around having a cup of tea in the morning. And this stunning, mysterious scenery awaits us again. Let's get into the trees. So I have to say that the experience of tree climbing is a difficult thing to learn. You have to overcome the very basic things that you should not be there, right? People don't usually go 60, 70 meters into a tree. So there is this natural initial response of fear that we all have to get over before we go anywhere into these trees. And also there's, like with maybe rock climbing, with climbing on rocks, there is sometimes a very macho attitude, a very masculine get up there and climb the trees and dominate the trees, but it's not like that. You have to really understand the language of each individual tree that you climb. When I climbed into this tree for the first time, I did it incorrectly. It was safe and all the rest of it, but I was not harnessing, I was not analysing or looking of how the tree could be climbed. So when I climbed for the first time with Rebecca and Sky, I was amazed that they were quicker, faster, and had a lot more fun than I did. And after that, it really showed me that each tree was an individual, and each species as well has a different construction. They can be climbed a different way. Again, Rebecca just hanging out 50 metres above the ground, standing on a branch. So, and again, we're comfortable up there. No offence, but I'd rather be up there than I am in the city now. It is such an amazing place to be. And after you do it for a long time, you get accustomed to it. You get relaxed. You trust the gear, you trust the environment, and you trust, most importantly, the tree. Hey. Again, beautiful days of climbing and beautiful sunlight. It's just an amazing place to be. Now, as part of this project, the Taiwan Tree Project, this is the first time that new scientific data has been produced alongside the project, alongside the nice photos and all the rest of it. There was this measurement system happening, and can you describe what you guys were doing at that time?
Well, we measure each branch of these trees, the direction, the length, and their girth. So we measure about there are total 48 branches of this tree, and 2 are dead. And let me explain in Chinese again. 我们量这棵树它的总高度，然后它上面的每根枝条的方向跟它的胸围，然后还有总共这棵树总共有48个枝条，然后有2个枝条是死掉的，然后还有它上面的附生植物我们也都有记录这样。Go back to Steve.
Okay. So this is an amazing thing, and it again comes all back to Rebecca and her skills and her enthusiasm to undertake this. So an amazing. There's Sky. She was over from the US where she's studying in Oregon, and you can see that visually, or from a photographic perspective, a tree is a very complex place to try and take photos. There's the obvious tangle of branches, but it is often the case that you are very, very close to what you're trying to photograph. Sometimes it works out great. There's these amazing epiphytes everywhere, beautiful rhododendrons. This is Sky taking those measurements of the branches. Very methodical approach. Again, still working. Taking the measurements again with the compass. I shouldn't skip through these photos too quickly, okay? You've all done some research. You've all done some study. And the biggest problem that we're trying to solve with the tree projects is, of course, seeing the tree, but also the scientific research methods and the science data that is associated with these places. Science, I hate to say it, is really boring. Science communication is a very, very big problem. The data, and if you know what you're looking at, it is amazing. But I'm sure you've got friends who you've tried to communicate what you've studied to, and they're just like, oh, okay, why? And that's because maybe we just need better tools, better communication tools to tell the story of why and how that research is undertaken. So that's the main reason which inspires me to get up into these trees, and I have to thank my lovely wife, Dr. Jen Sanger, for doing that. And just because with her research, I was a photographer before, and then I started working with Jen, and I feel very, very lucky to have had those two things joined together to be able to then produce things that are showing a new place in the world. More photos. So this is actually Sky climbing the big sister, and the big sister's exact height 71.3 meters. It's a substantial tree in anyone's language. This was maybe the first time that the big tree had been climbed as well.
Yeah.
Yep. So we did pretty much all our climbing in the middle sister, but this is the big sister. The great thing about photographing trees from all over the world is basically just like climbing, you have to understand the structure of the tree. Each tree tells a different story, but visually, each tree tells a different story as well. You'll notice in Tasmania in particular, when you saw the photos of the trees in Tasmania, they were bizarre shapes. They were very vertical, branches going straight up like that. They were dead, very, very dangerous. But here, it's like you could build a house up in these trees. The branches are very, very flat, very, very elegant, and they're just spectacular things to look at. And they also completely covered with epiphytes. This is one of the more spectacular maneuvers that was undertaken during the project. This is a tree-to-tree traverse. So we're going between the two trees, but up high in the canopy. This was your first tree traverse, or the first very, very high one?
Yeah.
So this is maybe 55 meters from the ground, and you can imagine putting yourself in this kind of situation. You're on the rope, you're trying to move over, and all of a sudden there's just nothing below you except forest. A great illustrative image of the epiphytes in the tree, the climbing, but also just the sense of scale that a human, a person, can provide into these images. This is probably the silliest thing that happened during the project. 7 people, including me, taking the photo in one small area of the tree at once. I wouldn't recommend having that many people in such a small space, but it was a pretty cool thing nonetheless. And just more climbing. So many good climbing. Here he is. Nice one. The tree is as Jen mentioned, can be measured in a number of ways, using these Johansson zones, dividing it up, and then your result is a graph, just like Jen's data. All right. The images are telling that same story, but visually in a language that anyone can understand. I hate to say it, I'm sorry, love, but I can't understand those graphs, so no one's business. And I'm just a very visual person, and so being able to see the epiphytes, the moss coverage at the base of these trees, is just the same thing represented differently. And so the combination that you all might think of in your own field of expertise and research is, what's the simplest way to visually tell that story? We have our own little project here, and it fulfills our goal, but maybe you should think about the complex things that you study, you're fascinated with. What's the simplest way that you can communicate that? All right, and so we have a great project where we back up this really hard scientific data with some great photos, and it's been a great adventure for us, but I would hope that everyone here can maybe translate that into their own field of expertise and how they can better communicate their ideas and their research to an audience. Beautiful, beautiful, amazing trees, just absolutely huge. Spectacular. That's the base of the big sister. And over here is the middle sister. There's the people, of course. Hey, like I said, once you've done tree climbing for a very long time, it's you know, it's dangerous, it's scary, but heck, if you've done it a long time, it's cool. It's really relaxing, and you get to hang out literally like a monkey in a place that no one else has possibly ever been before. It's such an amazing experience. You also get to see incredible, an easy word, incredible structures of the tree. So this is maybe 1/3 of the way up the big sister, and there is this absolutely massive formation on the entire trunk of the tree. You can't see that from the ground. I've got no idea. I'm not a scientist, but it is just amazing again to be able to experience trees in this way and see things that no one else does. This is it gives you a good idea of the forest. I'm actually in the big sister just here. This is the middle sister, and that is a secondary trunk of the middle sister. I mean the little small sister, I should say. The middle sister is over here, and this is other trees out into the forest. Some of the epiphytes. I always wanted to climb a tree very late in the afternoon when it was very, very misty. Luckily on this day it rained as well, so I climbed up the tree when it was raining and full of mist, but it gave a spectacular opportunity for some excellent photos of the plant life. So this is actually looking back down on the top of one of the branches. As you look up in any forest, at the bottom of the branches, you're not seeing the full story. From the ground, this branch looks barren, it looks bare. From the top, it is a garden. Some of the amazing, are they called shrubophytes? These are rhododendrons, but these are actually big plants. These are garden variety big plants that should be on the ground, but they're growing 30, 40, 50 meters up in the tree. Another perspective there, it's actually another shrub. It's a big plant. It's not a lower order plant like these lichens. And again, an amazing garden up in the top of the tree. This was very, very, very late. It's almost very dark in the background there. And I climbed right to the top of the tree, and then I happened to see this most incredible thick blanket of epiphytes, orchids, ferns, lichens, moss. The whole entire branch is just incredible. These dangling, hanging lichens, yeah. So again, illustrating a new environment. I went back the next day to try and photograph it again, but the lighting conditions weren't very, very good. I wanted to get this spectacular branch with the middle sister in the background, and there's sky at the top. And there's another photo of it. Again, just an absolutely stunning environment. And we're almost there. This is quite at the second last day of the project, and we're just about to take the measurement of the big tree. So to take that measurement, Bert is going to traverse across to the tree that I'm in, sets a line. He actually throws this small line with a weight over the tree and then gets it back, and then he climbs across. So this is maybe gives you a better sensation, a better idea of the sensation that it exists when it's just like these huge trees emerging out of the forest and being suspended between them. Bert doing his thing. So here's actually a photo from the drone looking back at the top of the big sister. Again, this amazing Taiwanese mountainous landscape behind us. And I think this is a little bit of video that shows Bert actually taking that measurement by hand. It's not done by lasers or anything like that. He's actually got a big measuring tape. He's carried it to the top of the tree and he's sending it down to the ground. So Sky is actually at the very, very top. This is the middle sister. So this is actually the extreme summit of the middle sister tree, and you can see the difference in height between those two trees. What an amazing place to be. Alright, so I would have really loved to show you a finished tree portrait from Taiwan, but it took me a long time just to organize the files, and if you will bear with me for 1 second, I might give you a very brief look behind the scenes. Forgive me, but I'm not too familiar with driving my computer like this. Where are we? Yeah, let's go straight here. It looks a bit skewed, but it's cool. I actually don't have the drives installed, but we should be fine. Okay, so this is basically the structure of what we've produced over the period. So all in all, there's 28,727 different items that were produced. The vast majority of that is the time lapse to create the video. So it's individual photos over many, many hours will go to make a short video. But the tree portrait itself, just under 6,000 photos, and literally every day of the project we'd be down there with the cameras up high, holding onto the string and waiting for the weather. I actually haven't had an opportunity to properly catalogue these yet, but you can obviously see the really good days. 1,268 photos in one afternoon. Must have been good that day. So these 2 days are obviously really good. Alright, so I must have a filter on. I can't actually reach that far off. Anyway. So yeah, of these 2 days, I maybe took the cameras up and down 10, 12, maybe 15 different times, and so each one of those runs of the camera system, I need to look at it, find the weather, because the weather would move very, very quickly. There'd be this mist coming up the valley and it would just engulf the trees. So I need to just keep taking the photos all the way down the tree and then start again. And hopefully there's enough images to produce one final greater weather event, because the time involved it would take to take the photos, the time it took to raise the cameras up was 2 minutes. It took 2 minutes to pull the cameras up. Then it took maybe 7 minutes to photograph the tree from top to bottom. And I'm sure you've been to the mountains in Taiwan. A lot can happen in 10 minutes in Taiwanese mountain weather. So I'm going to have to combine different days at different times to try and produce that one image which portrays that entire weather event successfully. So fingers crossed it doesn't take too long. But I could talk forever about this, and I'm sure you've probably noticed that, but I'm getting the tap on the phone from my lovely wife, and I think we're going to open it up maybe to some questions now.
有人想要问问题，问 Steve 或 Jen， 就是有关这一次的拍摄的任何八卦也都可以。那也可以用中文发问啊，我可以帮忙翻译一下这样。
All right. I'm sure you can ask the question in Chinese and.
Yeah, I say I can translate it.
Cool.
And I say they can ask us it.
If you don't ask the question, I will just keep talking.
I bet people are speechless.
So yeah, I just again have to see. I can just keep talking. I can just have to say again a huge thank you to Dr. Huang, or Director Huang, I should say, and Rebecca for being such amazing champions of the Taiwanese forest, and a special. I can't say how much we really do appreciate their effort, and of course all the volunteers who came out, who drove from Taipei or wherever in Taiwan all the way into the forest. The road's very difficult, terrain's very difficult, but these people spent their own time and their own money driving their cars, bringing their equipment out, and just being enthusiastic about making this project happen. And I can't say enough that while we maybe take the photos or do the stitching of the photos and all those kind of things, there is a mountain of effort and time and patience that a lot of people bring to this project. So we really hope to honour them and all of you and all of Taiwan in producing a magnificent photo and a great exhibit.
Thank you, that was amazing. You are always welcome here.
No questions? There we are, there we go.
I have two questions.
可以用那个麦克风。
I have two questions. The first, since the technologies is growth and develop very well, do you think another way to take the tree portrait, for example, use the drone? I remember the Jennifer talked about the difficulties to use the drone. But now I think something may be changed, and I just want to know.
Yes, of course. There is no problem using a drone. We've made a tree picture using a drone. We've actually made two, but one hasn't been released yet. The drones are an amazing tool which you can use to achieve a result. You should always, whatever you do, you should always envisage your result and then work backwards from there. We choose to use the tree climbing for a number of reasons. A, because it's fun. We love it. It's a great experience. And then B, it provides a much greater sense of adventure and exploration to the project. See, we can make a tree picture with a drone, no problem, but we don't have any other story to tell. And we really want to try and tell that full and complete picture of canopy exploration and the place and the time and the difficulty and that adventure as well. So for us, this method is laborious, it's difficult, it takes a long time, but it makes a much better result for us. Okay? We've made a tree picture in Tasmania using the drone, and also in Malaysia, in Penang in Malaysia using the drone. So that is a tool that we do use, but it lacks the theatre. Yeah.
I think it's always a very good experience to touch the tree. Yeah, thank you. And the second question is about if we can touch or climbing the trees, we have to measure the tree height, use some telescope or some optic.
Yep.
And but since you can climbing up to the trees, and I just want to know, do you find measure on the ground and
The-
the top.
Yep. I think that there's.
How different?
I can answer that in the same way that I answered the last question, but I'll hand over to the scientists for the actual real answer. And climbing the tree and using the measuring tape, that physical tape, it has all those excellent visual things to it. It has the adventure, it's climbing, it takes the time. So as storytelling, it's a much better way to illustrate it. The laser measuring devices are incredibly convenient, but they're just like the drone. It's like a little robot which doesn't have a personality, and it achieves the result, but it's a different way of achieving it. So I'll hand over to maybe Jen or Rebecca maybe to talk about the difference in measuring and if there's any difference.
Maybe Rebecca might be more skilled in answering this question. I know though that there are many different ways of measuring trees, as you mentioned, and especially now too that we have LiDAR data as well too, which is highly accurate. But it still seems that the preferred method of measuring trees, well, the final method of getting an accurate reading is to still climb to the top of the tree and measure it. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yes, the LiDAR is getting often used, but it's not that accurate in the complex terrain like Taiwan, and it's so expensive. And very often after using data to measure trees, people still have to climb to reconfirm the height. I know two examples. One is in Malaysia, the newly discovered tree. They finally climbed it, and the height is how much?
94.1.
Yes, 94. That is that. 忘记。
It's a Shoria species, so it's one of the dictrocarps. I think it's a yellow Moranti.
龙脑香科的树. It's finally being reconfirmed by tests. And the other example is the tallest tree in the world is the redwood. It's 104 point something.
That's 115.
115?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Steve correct, it's 115. Anyway, the height was being reconfirmed by tests finally. So yeah, probably text is still the most correct measurement. Yeah. And people dream to climb the tallest tree, so there's no problem. You find anyone to measure them.
No worries, pleasure. Anyone else? Come on.
How do you think about the two-day climbing skill they learn in Taiwan?
Sorry?
What you say in Taiwan you use 2 days to climb up to the top of the tree.
Yep.
Yeah, what is kind of skill? Yeah, what different skill in Taiwan? Yeah, how do you think about it? And do you try to use this kind of skill to other place?
I'll go back to that first part of the question. It took us 2 days it only took us because of Bert and his magnificent device and his exceptional skill in getting the rope into the trees. We were in the trees within 2 hours of arriving, and so that was very, very quick. And like I said during my presentation, that is always the most difficult part of tree climbing, is getting the rope into the tree. It took us 2 days to get the entire camera system installed. And if you might imagine it just like Jen's slide, we had the subject tree here and then another tree over here, and installing those lines. There was a third line, a third rope in that system that actually had to, if you can imagine, there was the subject tree, the three sisters, and then the rigging tree. So they were in a straight line where the rope went. Unfortunately, where the cameras needed to be was over here. So there was actually a third line that was shot into the forest that pulled that line into the correct position. You'll see that in the video when I get the chance to produce it. But yeah, it was quite a complex system. And the second part of the question was, was it different?
Yeah, how will you think about using this kind of skill in particular place?
Oh yeah, of course. We dream of traveling to visit big trees just like this all over the world. So, and the reason why we've chosen big trees, this is a fundamental part of the project as well, is because the images of these big trees, they have what you might say is the wow factor, right? Anybody who looks at that picture can be impressed by it. And it provides the viewer an initial gateway to
You talk too much.
Yeah,
Is that too much? Initial gateway to appreciate the forest. Particularly in Tasmania, we really designed the project we really designed the project to not be an environmental project. It's obvious that we are of a particular political persuasion. We have our ideas of what should happen to a forest, conservation, saving them, no bulldozers. But in order to communicate and effectively communicate to people who don't have that opinion, don't share that view, we chose not to tell that part of the story. We simplified our message. We simplified the forest to one picture and just one tree. And our hope was that the people who cut the trees down, they could also be impressed by that tree and by that picture. And they could form their own idea. They could start to think about the forest in their own way, and perhaps see it in a different way from their own construction. So we didn't tell people, we wanted to show people. And I think that was a very different approach, and ultimately one of the reasons why the Tasmania project was so successful, because we have a very long history in Tasmania. There's only two types of person in Tasmania. There's the greenies, who are the hippies and the people that save the forest, and there's the group that log the forest. It's a very divided community. And we wanted to reach out not to the greenies, we wanted to reach out to the other people. And that was our method, and it worked. It was really, really successful. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great. And the last thing is today is Steve's birthday. So we say happy birthday, Steve.
And I would like to say thank you again to Rebecca, who, if you ever need anything organised,
Ready for some stinky tofu for your lunch.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a long seminar, but we really appreciate you being here. Thank you very, very much.